Hey, this is Rob, and this is episode 69 of the Folly Coffee Podcast. Let's get it brewing. All right, so I'm here with Josh and Matthew, and I promise I'll only get that wrong a couple times here. Format of this episode is going to be a little different. Already we have two people, and we've only done that once before. Worked out pretty nicely with the Northern Coffee Works guys, but this is different because Josh reached out to me via email and said, I am a student. We've got a business idea. I would love to pick your brain about it. And I said, that sounds good. Why don't we record it and make it into a podcast episode? Anything coffee related at this point, I don't know how I feel about it. I feel a little phony that I want to record everything, not like having a really good conversation. And in the back of my head, I'm going like, this is great content. This is great content right here. But no, this will be pretty cool because you've got a business idea. We've discussed it very briefly. I kind of wanted to keep it that way so that as we're discussing now, it can be very honest conversation. And so I want to start by just saying, take everything I say with a grain of salt.
Will do.
Everything I've done with Folly or Filter on the cold brew side is completely made up, and I come from a beer background, so everything I say, take with a grain of salt. I am not the final word by any means. I'm very passionate about what I say. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that to start off with. But yeah, let's have a very open and honest conversation. Why don't you tell me about your idea? We'll go back to where it came from, and then we'll just continue from there.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm Josh. I've been in the coffee industry for about 10 years. My parents own a coffee shop in Madison, Wisconsin. So I've just always had this passion for coffee. And Matthew and I were both entrepreneurs, came into the University of Minnesota just passionate for creating something that would provide people an experience where they'd have fun and that we could just live our lives doing what we love. And it looks like that's what you do, Rob, at Folly. I've been to your tour in the last couple of weeks and just saw that incredible and dramatic presentation of how you came to be, the process the coffee goes through, and just thought, man, that's a guy who's doing what he loves and is after his passions. But yeah, I'll let Matthew introduce himself a little as well.
Yeah, my name is Matthew. I'm a classmate of Josh's, and we actually lived together. So we were in, the entrepreneurship class that we're in. It's actually kind of like our capstone project. So what happens is you apply for the class, and once you're in the class, each group is given $15,000 of funding to go out and just build a business. So the first couple months of that process was kind of us figuring out, okay, what kind of business do we want to build? Is this viable? Building groups, building teams. And yeah, Josh was kind of saying we both want to do something we're passionate about. And for me, it's really funny because I didn't have any background in coffee, absolutely none. I didn't even drink coffee really. And what was exciting for me was creating an experience that people are drawn to and excited to tell others about. And so we were both kind of spitballing ideas, trying to figure out what we wanted to do. And we kind of landed on doing this single origin espresso experience that we'll tell you a little bit more about later. But yeah, that's kind of a little bit about how or what situation we're in and the context that we're working within. So this semester and the next semester we'll be building a business essentially, and just trying to see where that goes. And this is kind of the idea that we have, is to build a single origin espresso experience.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. Two things I like already is the fact that you're here, the fact that you reached out. Barnaby, who's been a podcast episode on the past, you've spoken with him already. So that's already a really good first step, is going out and talking to as many people as possible. It's something that I did for well over a year. And when I moved back to start, it was every day, 2 or 3 people, anybody I could get with me that possibly any experience. Yeah. So that's really an awesome thing to be doing. I still do it to this day. It's why I started this podcast. No, I'm sorry. It's why I continue the podcast. Really, it's this selfish. It started to educate about coffee and kind of selfishly turned out a really cool way to meet people and sit down.
Free consulting.
Right. That's right.
And then on the other side, I can already tell you're the entrepreneurial type with the way that you hinted, we have this business idea without immediately going into it. It's a classic sales technique. I want to build some anticipation up front without telling you about it. You're going to make me ask about it. I like that. Yeah, so tell me about, all I know about it at this point is that it is a single origin espresso business based on the idea of the growing excitement behind single origin espresso. And there's probably not many people listening to a coffee podcast that don't know single origin espresso, but the term single origin refers to that the coffee comes from a single farm or region. There's some flexibility with people use that term. We tend to do it same farm or collective of farms, depending on that. And then obviously espresso is where it starts to get interesting. And I'm not even going to label that too much because that I kind of want to talk about that more as we begin to discuss your business idea, because there's a ton of confusion behind espresso and exactly what is it. And, I love drinking a good cup of espresso beans because they're so much stronger. And I go, okay, where can we start here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, either one of you, go ahead and tell me the start of just like, obviously coffee background probably influenced your decision to want to go into that.
Yep.
But how did you ultimately decide out of everything there is within coffee and experiences behind coffee that single origin espresso is what you want to focus on?
Yeah. So I'm just laying on the couch of our crappy house in Dinkytown in Minneapolis. And we're just like, we need to have an idea in the next 4 hours because we're meeting with our professor and we have nothing right now. So I'm just looking through coffee trends. So I'm like, I'm passionate about coffee. That'd be cool if we could start something in coffee. Not sure if there's any space or opportunity there, but let's just like go through these trends. So I'm looking at the SCA 2020, 2019 trends, and I am continually seeing espresso beverages consumptions are increasing. People at the ages of 18 to 24 are consuming 40% more coffee. Lattes, Americano, straight espressos going up. The consumption of black coffee is increasing. I'm like, hey, I've been to a coffee shop on the West Coast that does only pour overs. I'm like, that was awesome. I got to pick like what type of bean I wanted to drink, and they made that cup specifically for me. I was like, what if we could do something like that but for espresso? Is there like a market for that? It seems like it's rising. It seems like there's trends in this direction. Like, what can we do with this? So we are like, I'm bringing this idea to my professor. What if we create like a coffee shop kind of, but they can choose like what espresso they want. I was pretty naive, didn't know much about espresso to begin with. I was more like the business side of a coffee shop, working with my parents like most of my life. The more we looked into it, we're like, we're just going to dive in. We're going to talk to as many experts that we can get our hands on. So Matthew and I just started reaching out to people. We reached out to you, Rob, Barnaby, Joe Morocco, a lot of the guests you've had on your podcast, and we're like, we just need to learn as much as we can about this. So the more we're learning, the more we're like creating what we want our business to be. And that is, we want to provide a interactive and intimate educational experience, tasting experience that focuses specifically on single origin espresso. So there's single origin coffees, a lot of cupping classes, pour over classes that people are loving right now, and that's kind of been a wave that we've been riding lately, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I was thinking, what if we could do something with espresso? I've never been to, or even seen anything where it's like, hey, come to this class and try this new single origin espresso from Ethiopia, and let's talk about the tasting notes. Let's talk about what we get out of it, how fragile it is when you're dialing it in. So we want to create something where we have an educated barista leading a group of about 8 people through a tasting process. So we want to highlight specifically 2 bags of beans from 2 different origins in 2 different processes. And throughout this experience, we'd be taking our group of 8 on this ride with us, talking about, okay, what are we tasting here? What does washed process mean? What does natural process mean? Honey process? What makes it special that only comes from this one origin? Who grew this coffee? Who are the farmers? Like the farmers, like this is their lifeblood, their passion. Like, what are we doing with it now? Like, I don't want to just grab all these coffees from everywhere. I want to like focus in on the story of the farmer and who they are and what they're doing, and be able to communicate that to the guests that we have. So yeah, we're on this path of creating that experience. We've done some MVPs to test the concept, and we had Barnaby Holmes.
Minimum viable product.
Yep, the minimum viable product. We had Barnaby Holmes as our barista, and he walked a group of about 5 of us. Yeah, he's insane.
Yeah,
so as we learned about this, we learned...
He was the first person to educate me as a barista.
Really? Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and we just learned that espresso is fragile. Like, we mess up the dialing process, like, you're going to taste something that might not be pleasurable. And that this is going to take some, like, real skill to really dial this in. But if we get it right and people taste something amazing from the first time, you can just see it on their faces. And it's like, wow, like, I've never had a cup of espresso or coffee that tasted like this. And we can highlight those funky, fun flavors that these different origins can bring. So that's what we are basically trying to do.
Cool. So the MVP, was it a pop-up, or how did you decide what is the minimum viable product of this concept?
Yeah. Matthew, you want to speak a little bit?
Yeah. So for the MVP, we just we wanted to figure out, we need to test a lot of assumptions. Number one, would people enjoy the experience? Would people, what specifically about the experience do they like and are they engaged in? Is it education? Is it tasting? Obviously, is this something that you would pay for? And we gathered kind of a pretty large spectrum of people who were experiencing coffee. So some people don't drink any coffee really. We had some people who love coffee and drink it regularly. We had some people who consider themselves to be like coffee snobs and love to go to tastings regularly. And so we had 5 people, and then Barney was our barista, and it was basically what we were expecting to happen. So we had 2 bags of beans, and then each of those beans was brewed, or not brewed. Most of those beans had 2 different weights that we used. So 17 grams, then 18 grams. And then after pulling the shots and giving them the espressos, like, what did you taste? And what do you think is different about this? And so Barnaby kind of gave them the education as to what happens with the beans and the elevation. And it was like super engaging. Everyone really enjoyed it. And our goal with that was kind of to see what can we improve on? What do people like right now? What can we change? Because what's really interesting is one of the things that like we found from that, because we had such a large spectrum of people. On one side, it was like, oh, I wish we had more tastings. It's
difficult.
Yeah, exactly. I wish we had more tasting and like a little bit less education, versus someone on the complete opposite end who had just started coffee. Was saying that they really enjoyed the education. They like are going to start thinking about coffee a lot more, and they like really enjoyed the experience. And so we're trying to figure out and kind of refine what kind of experience specifically do we want? Are we catering it towards the early consumer that's curious, or a very experienced consumer who's actively seeking out these crazy flavors and these crazy like beans that aren't really found anywhere else in the Minneapolis area? So that we're trying to figure out almost like what sets us apart and like what would differentiate us. Mm-hmm. So that's actually one of the major problems that we're trying to look for and figure out for a business.
So the espressos that you're serving or built into the business plan, is it going to be a rotating roaster program where you're featuring different espressos from different roasters, or is it going to be every single experiential day is the same roaster roasting different varieties? How do you plan on or roasting your own? Is that in the future? How are you looking at the espressos that you're using? Because one thing just right off the bat is when you're looking at like the scientific method, you want to manipulate as few variables as possible when trying to identify the differences between something. So when I'm looking at something like espresso, like when it gets to Jeff, who's our head roaster, obviously he's identifying the same coffee, and the only thing he's evaluating for it across different batches is, are there differences in taste? And if so, is it better or worse? And so he's evaluating one thing when he's evaluating the quality of our coffees. However, when he has a new batch of samples, he needs to evaluate, does each bean work? And so he roasts each of them exactly the same on a sample roaster. So he is identifying the different flavor components of this. With something like espresso, you have a lot of different factors going into it. Mm-hmm. So how do you approach that in terms of which espresso beans you're going to use for each kind of individual experience?
Yeah. So right now we're still trying to refine what route we want to take. We've identified a few routes of maybe highlighting local roasters where they have the information of their coffee, of the farmer, and we highlight their beans and partner with them to kind of educate their consumer and to just really zone in on like what makes their bean special and what brings out the flavor. The hard thing about that, as you're saying, like it takes a very skilled, highly skilled barista to be able to know what's right when they're dialing in the espresso and how they should really tweak it so it tastes like what the roaster is really aiming for. So another route we're going down is Matthew has some connections with some Asian source farmers where we could source from. So right now we're trying to figure out, do we want to partner with a local Minneapolis roastery to get our own beans in, partner with a roaster, and roast our own coffees for these events, and then maybe sell beans afterwards and bring in some really unique coffees from maybe China or Thailand, Myanmar, wherever it may be.
Yeah, and obviously I have some very extreme biases because we are wholesale roasters, so I have very strong opinions about like own roasting programs versus using a roaster. Mm-hmm. Some of the challenges I think you would face up front in sourcing your own coffees is there's a certain volume minimum where you're going to get really great roasters with a lot of experience that have their own program to be able to roast coffees just for this.
Yeah.
Because asking a roaster to do 5-10 pounds is not likely to happen up front if it's groups of 8. And then you're also limited in the time window that you can have espresso tastings because not everybody's an extreme coffee nerd like myself where I'd go to a tasting and spit all of it out if it was in the afternoon, if I wanted to sleep that night.
Yeah.
And so I kind of view it, and I'm curious your opinion on this, is I think there's a few different ways you could possibly approach that of people trying to evaluate differences in flavor. Because you're doing single origin espresso, it doesn't have to be an espresso offering from a roaster. So you don't have to go to this roaster and get their espresso and this one and that one. Most roasters are offering at least 4 to 5 different offerings. Mm-hmm. And so you could go to one roaster and say, hey, we're doing single origin espresso. We want to use 3 or 4 of your origins. And I'll get back to why I say 3 or 4 instead of just 2 in a second. But we want to contrast across the board these 4 different espressos. And then you go to the barista and you just find a skilled barista and say, make each one of these taste the best.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There's another complicated issue is now if you have a different dial in for these 4 espressos and you have a 2 group head, 3 group head, 1 group head.
Yep.
That's another variable you have to consider is that if you're pulling them out of the same group heads, unless it's a fully manual machine in which you need a really skilled barista, which is obviously probably a big part of this, you probably need a fully manual machine so that you can time out each individual shot differently. Yep. So there's a lot of different factors going into it. But the goal in my mind is like, how can we eliminate as many factors as possible that I might be comparing? Because if I went and you had 4 different roasters, I would, in the back of my head, probably be going, who did this the best? Like, but if you have the same roaster, you have the same roasting philosophy behind each of the single origin coffees, and then there's one factor gone. And then if you have the barista and say, hey, dial this to one setting or dial this each individual one to which you think tastes best, then that kind of dial-in procedure is taken care of. This is this barista's preference on this espresso. And then the last thing they're really identifying is the differences between the origins, which is the ultimate goal, I think, of what you're doing. Because this is an interesting concept in the sense that I would definitely go to this 100%. Like, huge coffee nerd, obviously going to go. And I would probably go every time you switch roasters because there is no opportunity out there. And this is half the reason we opened the tasting room was there's no opportunity to go out there and taste multiple different things in a row unless you're me or Jeff, and we'll go to a cafe and drop $60 so we can try your pour over, your espresso, your single origin espresso, your cold brew. And that's why I think 2 might be limiting. Obviously there's logistics of pulling shots and doing it in a timely fashion, but limiting it to just 2 doesn't separate you from any great specialty cafe that already has an espresso offering and probably a secondary espresso offering. So if there's a potential way that I always think of what makes a business concept the most different, and what's the most different at this point is the fact that you are, did I ever press record on this thing? I don't think it did. And what makes your business concept the most different is that you have a chance to taste multiple espressos side by side. And so you want to make sure like to lean into those differences as hard as possible, which sometimes is much easier said than done. let me hit record on this. So there we go. Like I said, not many people watch on YouTube, so I'm not too stressing about it. As long as the audio is going. By the way, we're available on YouTube. Anyway, you want to lean into those differences. And so if you can logistically find a way to make more than 2 types of espresso, even if you can just get to 3, that's something I can't really go to any cafe and find.
Yeah.
So that, and the other part about using a roaster and the coffees that they already sell is how do you plan? So I'm going to come back to this point of why should you probably only use one roaster at a time, is how do you plan to promote it and market it and get the word out there?
Yep. Yeah. Right now our initial thought process is going down that route of partnering with roasters and using those roasters to really help us in the marketing initiative. One thing Barnaby is telling us, like, hey, in the next decade, coffee is going to be so much more expensive than it is now. And customers need to know why they should come to a Folly or a Northern Coffee Works and pay the $5-6 for a cup of coffee instead of going down the street to Starbucks or Caribou and paying $2. So kind of what we'd be doing is helping a roaster in that process of really educating their customer and saying, like, this is quality coffee, this is why, and this is, like, can you notice the taste? Let's walk it through, like, let's walk through this together. Like, what's the spectrum of what you're tasting? Like, how does this compare to the other coffees you've tasted before? How does it compare side by side, like you're saying? So, yeah, we plan on just marketing like that. We're an interactive and educational experience. We also have relationships with, I don't know if you've talked to Shelby. Yeah. We've met with her at the Minnesota Coffee Collective. And
she is, Brandon's my business partner at Filterra. That's his girlfriend.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow, that's crazy.
Hey,
Small world.
If they're a coffee person, I've probably forced them to meet me at some point. But that one I happen to have a really direct connection to.
Wow. Yeah, like, coffee's super relational. And, like, that's what we're finding out in this, like, this process is, like, hey, if we just meet the right person, they're going to open doors that we couldn't even thought of.
Yeah, because the difficulty is if you had multiple different roasters and you approach me like, hey, will you promote that we're doing this? I go, like, of course, because I want to be nice. And I also, my view on competition is very, very different than most.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
I promote other people even if we're not involved at all, because I think that if everybody starts drinking better coffee, it's going to be good for everyone. That the biggest population of coffee drinkers that is the opportunity is not the people currently drinking great coffee. It's the ones that have never had it. So I would be very apt to promote it, but there's a lot of people that if there's another brand attached to it, I'm not promoting it because that doesn't strengthen only my brand.
Yeah.
And so if you had one roaster, that's basically like someone running like a professional tasting of just your coffee. And so you'd be able to utilize like email blast, because like the different forms of marketing is like Instagram to me is like solid. I think it's pretty dang good.
Absolutely.
But the email list is really, we're finally recording on that thing. But the email list is like what I'm learning that is probably the most valuable, but it's also, people are like very protective of using it because customers hate getting blasted with unnecessary emails. But this is the type of thing that I would want to tell my customers about. You have a chance to come here and taste 3, 4, 5 different Folly coffees as espresso. And then that's kind of the last component is like the education of espresso itself is it's valuable for a roaster to be like this. All of our coffees can be espresso. That alone there is a cool educational piece. So let's get into, how did you decide 2 espressos and how did you decide groups of 8 and how strongly tied to you is it being a guided tasting?
Yeah. So I'll start with your first question. The reason we chose 2 espressos and why we tested that for MVP is Barnaby invited us over to Intermix Beverages for like a personal kind of training. He basically gave us our MVP, but like only to us. And it was so cool. Like just standing behind his espresso machine, watching him pull these shots and like the mastery he has, just engaging us the whole time. Matthew and I were just like on cloud 9 going through that with him. We're like, Barnaby is
why I love him and hate him. He's technically a direct competitor of mine.
Like he's the coolest guy we've ever met. Like this is nuts. And in going through that, he had a couple coffees and like Matthew saying earlier, he pulled the first shot at 18 grams of coffee and then put it through. We tasted it. We kind of walked through the acidity, the sweetness, the bitterness, then the flavors you're getting out of it. And he's like, all right, I think if we take it down to 17 grams, it would like bring up the sweetness, lower the acidity, and kind of make that the scale a little bit more balanced.
And so is this him guiding you through this that kind of turned the light bulb on that this should probably be a guided experience of how we do it?
Yep. Yeah, because like both Matthew and I, we had no idea like the balance that we were looking for, and like the flavor that brought, and like the pleasure and like the education that it brought us, and working through it with him. It wasn't like this is information you need to know. It's like, let's figure this out together. What are you tasting? Like, what should we let's do this to the coffee, and we'll see how it impacts it. So then he brought it down to 17. We tasted it. Matthew turned to me and he's like, bro, if you didn't tell me this was from another bag, like if you didn't tell me this is from the same bag of coffee, like I would have had no idea. Yeah. Like it tastes completely different. And like, that's where it clicked, and was like, that's what we want to provide to people. We were initially focusing on like side by side tastings of different coffee. Like if you get different tastes, the same bag of beans, like to me, that's even cooler. It's like just to really zone in on that. And then I think through that, like what you were saying, we would love to partner with different roasters and have like a rotating event. That's what would bring people still coming through our doors, and we'd be able to provide them with this experience again. And that's something like I personally would love, like going to every time there's a new offering, like you were saying.
So having opened the tasting and tour room, some things I've learned is we were like, let's do it every Saturday and Sunday. This will be dope. And we'll do our first one at 8, our last tour at 2. We did one weekend with that time frame, and we're like, we can't physically do that again. We cut it down to noon. We're like, let's do it Saturday, Sunday till noon. And then 6 weekends in a row, and Jeff turns to me. He's like, hey, I haven't had a day off. I've been working 7 days a week for the past 6 weeks. And I was like, yeah, we need to change this. And so now we're down to Saturday. And the thing about our experience is that it doesn't really need to make money for it to continue, as long as we can break even. And so on its own, if we cut back the hours, that's fine. But in order for you to grow or generate more revenue or pick up more customers, you need to be able to expand on that. And so one thing that could address the issue, and again, this is just spitballing off the top of my head here. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm like a former beer salesman, started a coffee company, just whatever. But one thing you could do is, how do you get it so that there's an educational component that caters to everybody who comes through? The coffee nerd, quite frankly, does not want to sit through the full educational piece.
Yeah, for sure.
But if it's completely based around that, what you're going to find is you're going to get groups of people with high-end coffee nerds that they get the shot of espresso, completely ignore what's going on here, are smelling it, tasting it, probably have a notebook, probably writing down tasting notes, completely ignoring what's going on, which is fine. But if you've got somebody that's a brand new coffee drinker and they look over and see this person ignoring your expert, they might go, oh, is this person not worth listening to? And especially if you're going to have repeat customers, because I would come back for every roaster you do. I would, again, I'm overly nice, so I'd be doing the Minnesota thing where I'm nodding and not listening. I'm just thinking in my own head. But over time, as you get repeat guests, even new coffee people are going to learn about everything. And so how do you do it in a way that caters to the people that already have learned and know, but also provide enough education for someone that's new? One potential where you wouldn't be tied to time, because that's where I start to get uncomfortable, is in order for growth to happen is that you're tied to a time constraint, because then the only way to grow is you both are spending way more of your time, or you run into the thing of like, well, we can't do an experience Monday through Friday to reasonably, so it's probably a Saturday, Sunday thing, maybe Friday. Is there a way to, if you've probably been to a shop that has any sort of like a board that you get your coffee on a board with an informational card. So maybe you do something like that, but with such an intense focus on espresso that it's different. Because if I were to go to a place that had an espresso flight where I could get 4 espressos and it had all the information about each espresso, you could even cater it to like, hey, how much do you know about espresso? Scale of 1 to 10. Okay, here's our newbie card. This is like, what is espresso? You start to get repeat customers. You go, hey, I know you. Check, like, here's the card about like how we dial it in, grams in, grams of coffee, seconds in, weight out, all that stuff that people want to know. That could be a potential way that you're not limited to 8 people for every 15 minutes. How long do you plan on having like each experience be at this point?
About an hour to an hour and a half.
And so that if you have 8 people per hour, hour and a half, you're going to start to have to command a price that's going to be pretty dang expensive.
Oh, yeah.
And if you think of kind of a bell curve of returning on investment, if you're trying to land right in the middle there of the perfection between the number of customers and the price you're charging to maximize your revenue without, having to, you're limited by time. You can't just continue going because it is a caffeinated beverage. You might find the balance of education and excitement somewhere where you're not tied down to a full experience like that. And you could have that type of offering be once a quarter or once a month. So for someone that's like, I want to sit down with this expert barista and dig into each coffee and learn, those people exist. They're pretty far and few between. But those people will pay that premium. And so you can still capture that customer and grow their excitement and have this offering. That also gives you a longer time to promote those events. Because I will tell you straight up, trying to promote something like that every single weekend, you're going to run through everybody in the Twin Cities, Minnesota that is like willing to pay for an experience like that. So is there a potential way that you can efficiently serve 3 or 4 espressos, so you're different from other cafes, do it in a way that you've got a board with information on it, have additional cards or even just video links. People are getting used to QR codes this day that like, hey, here's all the videos related to this week's so that you continue the experience. And I think people would understand that if it's a fair price, like I'm getting a essentially guided experience as I drink it, but like I didn't have to pay an insane price. And also, I'm not limited to 8 people every hour and a half. And so that's because to be quite frank, the pricing we do for our tasting and tour room is like, I want to pay my people really well and I want to break even. And that's it.
Absolutely.
And so if this was my alone business, I wouldn't be paying rent right now. And so that's kind of a factor that I would personally be worried about is that where do you find the people, especially because it's going to be geographically located? If this is something that is a kit you send out, that's a little different because it's easier to find these people that are on the far end of the coffee nerddom across the country. But on a local level, the depth of that pool, I probably know all of them. Legitimately. And so that would be a potential solution. And the thing I would consider is like, think of a bell curve of like the cost and the experience, like how in depth, if you kind of create a range of the educational experience, is how in depth and intense and personal does that experience have to be versus what can we charge for something like that? So I think what you're talking about right now is the far end of the spectrum. This is like, I mean, I would probably do it. I'd probably do it once because like the spend on that would have to be pretty intense. And then after that, it's kind of like I probably personally couldn't justify continuing to spend it. And I'm absolutely obsessed. Someone like Jeff might convince me to continue to pay for it as a business write-off. But that's because I'm easily flexible when it comes to coffee stuff. But if even I am going to question the second visit, it's probably overly intense thing. And I'm just, I don't even know if do you know how much you would have to charge for like that kind of experience?
Honestly, based on the expense analysis we've been doing so far, around $30 person. And
that's not bad, but I will just tell you that it's probably not enough for this to be a sustainable
and to grow.
Grow. It's probably not enough to be able to turn this into a sustainable long-term business. And that is a difficult thing in starting a business is you're like, well, I don't want to overcharge because I want to find customers. I would rather have customers and not be making money. But then all of a sudden you've got an established price that if you try to inch upwards, customers are like, hey, this isn't what you charged previously. And so if anything, I would try to start at something that's a much more reasonable price at a margin and a profitability standpoint that will work really well and later have to shift and say, hey, we need a more intimate experience. But then what you're doing is you give people the option is if you still wanted to do this intense hour-long, $30, $40, $50 experience, it's available. But most people, myself included, but even just casual coffee drinkers that don't really know anything about espresso, the opportunity to taste four side by side alone is a value proposition, which is what you're looking for.
Absolutely.
And then every layer you can add into that of creating an experience without having to be tied to physical time. Is that physical time?
We get what you mean.
It's a made up concept, so I don't know if that makes sense. But if you're not tied to an actual standard of time by growing, those are the things I would focus on. So instead of having to pay someone that's because here's the other side. Baristas are an interesting breed of people. Barnaby's a rare bird in the sense that he is a very talented barista and also a very good presenter.
Absolutely.
It's a lot of people. I found that people that love dialing an espresso don't like talking to people. They're like, I love espresso because I can focus on this one thing and not have to talk to people. And so trying to find someone that can dial in the espresso incredibly well and want to do back to back to back to back 1 hour presentations. That would be incredibly challenging. So instead, can we pay that person a one-time premium to, hey, can you be in our video? Can we hire a professional production company to film a video of this person dialing in espresso every time we change roasters? And then, do you know how much easier it would be to get roasters? One, they're already going to want to do it, but you go to them and be like, here's the whole setup.
Absolutely.
It is a professionally produced thing about 4 of your coffees being pulled as espresso. You're welcome to use that in any way you want. And then me as a user, coming down and drink this espresso and have a video guiding me through that tasting, I think would be just as valuable, because if I'm that person that wants the in-depth educational thing, I just will never hit pause on that video. If I'm somebody that's like, I kind of know everything about espresso, it's not me, but like, you know, Jeff, maybe not even Jeff, but like Donna in our tasting room is insane at espresso. Maybe she'd be like, I don't need to hear how to dial an espresso. I've done this thousands and thousands of times. You can focus on the card or just skip through the video. Just to, you know, you could highlight, I think you can do that on YouTube, like highlight, here's tasting notes of each one, if that's all you want. And that would give more flexibility to the user to kind of create an experience that they want.
Absolutely.
And I think roasters would be very, very apt to promote that. They'd be using your video that has your branding on it. It would have your handles, your website, and yet you'd be getting other people to share it because of the value that would add.
I think the question I have is like, logistically, how do we bring that to fruition in the marketplace? Like, how do we approach a coffee shop? Because like, we're probably not going to go out and lease our own place right now.
Okay, here's where I'm getting pumped up here. Okay.
Let's do it.
I'm getting excited about this. So pop-ups obviously are becoming more and more culturally acceptable with COVID. And even before that, pop-ups were exciting. Renting time on machine would probably be not terribly difficult. I think the ideal scenario, you'd have your own mobile espresso unit. Like we have, it's expensive up front, but once you have it, you've got a machine that you're familiar with and you can bring it to wherever. That would be the ideal scenario. But in the short term, if you go to a shop and be like, hey, can we take this over? But they probably wouldn't want to give up their prime time hours of Saturday, Sunday. So that does get difficult. The pop-up thing would be probably the best short-term scenario. I mean, we have our espresso machine that we're not using while it's closed for COVID right now. That's not a long-term thing, but hey, are there opportunities of places that aren't currently open to the public, or is there a way to do that? That I don't know. And it's probably your biggest expenditure challenge in terms of upfront spend.
Absolutely.
You'd probably have to invest in a mobile coffee unit. That would also increase the impact of your videos if it had like a consistent branding and unit. It would make it look really legit. That's the biggest challenge, and I think you'd have to go mobile coffee unit, find a cafe that would be crazy enough to let you use it during prime time hours. Or that I don't know. And that would probably require pulling a few strings. On the other side, there are mobile coffee companies that if you said, hey, can we rent your machine only? Do you have weekends that you're free? They'll do that when they're not booked up, but those things get booked up like crazy. And there's going to be 1,000 weddings next year, so you probably won't be able to get hold of that. Sorry, I'm on a tangent here because I'm like, God, there's got to be something I'm not thinking of. But that's a tough thing about espresso is you are tied to a high quality espresso machine. There's lots of components that go into that. Shoot, where was I going? Oh, okay. Here's where it gets interesting. How do we tie ourselves further away from physical guided experience where you're in person? If you can build a platform and a following behind espresso nerds, you pay, or I would recommend getting, because what you're lacking right now is somebody within the business that is like espresso everything. They need to know the ins and outs of espresso. I think it would be beneficial to bring in someone, whether you're giving them equity or whether you're paying them handsomely to be that person. Because without an expert on board, I would see you guys producing videos and telling me about espresso, and no offense, but I'd be like, who are these guys telling me about espresso?
College students.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I do that at Folly. That's why Jeff does all the coffee stuff, because he lapped me so fast in my coffee knowledge that I was like, I'm not going to, I know a hell of a lot, but this guy is making me look like I just started, which I kind of did. But if you could build a following of espresso nerds, then you could have this super unique social media platform where all your content is focused on single origin espresso, dialing in espresso, roasting espresso. And then you could have another opportunity on your website, on a YouTube channel, on TikTok, on Instagram, of having short form videos about dialing espresso, because I think it's something that a lot of baristas hear about, and you don't really get hands-on experience until you're in a shop. And even when you're in a shop, you have to work there for months and months before they let you even try to dial an espresso.
Yeah.
So you could build this business into another thing where it's like an educational platform too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then guess what? If you build this educational platform, people are going to want to come taste espresso from the single origin espresso like experts.
Yeah.
And here's where my bias might come into play as a wholesale roaster. I would keep the focus there. I would continue to rotate roasters and highlight different roasters. That way, roasting is never even a part of the conversation. Your business, really what it is espresso.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The dialing in of espresso, drinking espresso. It's not the roasting of espresso, because that it's its own topic.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
And then if you have rotating guest roasters, every time you have a new roaster, interview of what's your approach to roasting an espresso blend versus single origin. What's your approach to this? And that would be really cool, because that's the type of content people would want to consume. And you have to, even within the niche of specialty coffee, I might sound crazy to say that's not niche enough anymore. Right. But if you were the people within single origin, all these guys are doing is intensely studying the act of making espresso.
Right.
That would be really, really cool.
Yeah.
And then you could bring in guests, and then it's not just one person. It's like, hey, here's a platform.
Yeah.
It's almost like, it's a terrible comparison, but like Hot Ones, like, it's kind of about the chicken wings, but the way that platform grew is like the guests they got were so good that, like, I go to watch a celebrity, and then all of a sudden I'm watching all those videos. So if you're able to find like these guests and bring in really legit people to film videos with you, can be totally on their schedule. It can be done remotely. You can find a production company in their area, hey, we're going to pay someone to come in and film you pulling espresso. Here's all the questions we need to do, and we have a way that you do it.
Yeah.
I'm getting overly excited about this right now. But do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. On like the ground level, how do we stay true to pulling a good shot of espresso? Well, they're able to taste them side by side. A lot of the feedback we've gotten from professionals has been like, hey, like a tasting flight would be awesome for espresso, something that's never been done, but how can you'd have to have different grinders and have each one dialed in already. Like espresso goes bad if it sits for more than 30 seconds. You'd have to have like a insane multi-head espresso machine. How do you like stay true to your product while doing this?
That's the ultimate logistical challenge of being able to do this in a shop. Because they are factoring in time. They have to be in and out that door like this. Someone who's showing up to do this, time is less of a factor. It's not why they're there. It shouldn't be the number one concern of how fast can we do it. Obviously, it needs to be a reasonable wait time. But if you can find, I mean, like a 4-group head espresso machine would obviously be ideal. And then probably at least 2 grinders. But you can pre-dose espresso beans to be able to be at the size dialed into each group head, and you can individually grind those through the espresso machine. Obviously, grind size is a factor in dialing in espresso, and so part of this is like you'd have to take slight, I guess, concessions for the perfection of each one. But I think even me going up and seeing, oh, they only have 2 grinders, but they're pulling 4 shots, I'd be like, it's worth it for me to be able to taste 4 espressos, knowing that they're working with 2 grind size. Yeah. And the number of espressos, I think, is more important than is each one perfect, because people are just coming in to taste the differences between the coffees. Yeah. And you'll probably be pouring some shots that like aren't ideal as espresso. There are some coffees that just don't pour great as espresso, but you still want to use those because it's like, here's how this tastes. Here's why we wouldn't probably serve this in a cafe.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I still would want to taste that. And so it's like, what I would literally do is like have a notebook in front of you and create like, what are we doing the most different? And I would list that all the way to how are we no different than a cafe or what anybody else is doing. And the things at the top of the list, that's where you lean into it. And so if the ability to taste multiple different espressos side by side is the number 1, that should always be the priority. If number 2 is that these are very, very well prepared espresso shots, you see what I'm saying? If that was your number 1 priority, you might say we have to have 2 shots because that's the most we can do and have them both be perfect. But if the number of espresso shots is more important, then you go, well, let's concede a little bit on just grind size, have 2 grinders doing single pre-dosed shots. And that, we hope people understand that it's like, obviously, but we're doing this so different that it's going to be a little bit different. And then maybe over time, if this turns into a thing, you're like, let's have 4 grinders, you know? It could get to the point that like the opportunity to grow as a social platform, in some ways, you could do it quicker, faster, have a broader reach. And then this is just like the experience side of it. And so you have to have this because that's the ultimate thing.
So it brings people in.
Yeah. And so I'm almost talking about an entirely separate business here, but you could see how it'd be really easy for them to feed each other. And you're just like, it's the ultimate way of promoting while creating an educational platform and then being able to use it as people are tasting espresso. So I'm sorry, I like kind of went off on a whole tangent on the digital side, but this side's very intriguing to me because like you see someone like obviously like James Hoffman and you go, well, you know, he's a world barista championship, of course people are going to listen to what he's saying, but if you created a platform that, I can't think of a lot of people that you said, hey, if I hired a film crew, which at this point you can do pretty affordably, if we hire someone in your area to come into your shop in off hours and film you saying these things about your espresso, and then you're welcome to use that content in any way. We just ask that we can use it for, and then we're also going to serve your coffee at our concept for 1 month, for 2 months, whatever it may be. I don't know a lot of people that would say no to that. You'd be able to get people and like really legitimate coffee professionals to be talking on these different things. And then that's going to drive people to want to come to your physical location, but it's also going to want to drive people to come to your platform about education. And then when you tell people we're the leaders in education, you're not saying you two are, because I'll see you in 15. If you want to spend the next 15 years just learning, but you can say your company are the leaders in single origin espresso education. And that I think would be really compelling. And so I'm sorry if I took this and ran with it in a totally different direction.
Absolutely not.
That's great.
But where I look at it, I get very uncomfortable when I'm tied to time. Any new decision I make in my business, I go, the podcast, I'm tied to it with time, but I love doing this, so I'll do it. Any other decision that I make, I'm trying to do the opposite. I go, how can I cut that tie of having to be somewhere, having to do something more to grow? And that's like, obviously, when you think of like natural expansion of like, hey, a bigger roaster, we can roast more coffee, we're less tied to time. That's a very obvious one. But with things like tastings or with the tasting and tour room, that's one where I go, it's worth it for me, but it's not like we could triple the size of our tasting room and be able to do more. And so that, I guess I really ran with it. And so I hope I didn't like hijack anything on that side, but
absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
I think the scary thing for us coming in, and that's why we're still like talking to people, doing interviews, is like, how are we going to get this off and going? How are we going to scale it? How are we going to grow it? How are we going to even do an in-person experience in the midst of COVID? Like, we have all these constraints and all these risks, like time, professional barista, the marketing side of it, getting roasters as partners, like that. There are so many risks looking at it, and we don't want to be spending 6-7 hours of our weekend just totally grinding at this one part of our business and barely making any money off of it, just trying to pay back the bank essentially. So I think you took it in a direction where we can like think a lot more deeply about how can we add this, how can we logistically make this work where we stay true to what we want to do with our business, and we want to educate consumers. We want consumers to know like the complexity that single origin espresso can bring. We want to highlight roasters, we want to highlight farmers, while taking a step back and building a platform to do this on. So, I mean, Matthew, I'd love to like hear what you're thinking, but I appreciate where the conversation has gone.
Yeah, I totally appreciate like these ideas, because this is completely out of the realm of anything we've really thought of, which is great. I think at this stage, like we want to consider every option and before we move forward, because at this point we haven't spent any money really, which is the best time to really ideate and feel like, okay, what direction specifically do we want to go before it's like too late to change.
It's never too late, trust me. We're making a hot sauce, like you can do anything.
But yeah, like I think that's like super. I think the idea of building an online platform and creating something that's like not restricted, like you said, like by time, I think is great. I think that's exactly like the kind of way that we should be thinking about future-proofing our business, and actually future-proofing so that it's like we're able to scale. With the event that we had, the MVP, it was very much like a one-time event. Like it would have been very difficult to replicate, because so what happened was we have connections with Corner Coffee, and then we just asked Barnaby if he wanted to just help us out and be
Cross
the barista. And so it was that kind of, the way that we hosted that event was not scalable at all. It was purely like, let's just test this to see if customers enjoy the experience, period. And for you to come to us and be like, okay, here is an idea to actually scale it right from the beginning, I think that's something that's super valuable for us to think about. And like, it gets me super excited because like my background is more in like videography, and I've been doing a lot more of that. And so that's super exciting for me to know like, oh, this is a way that I can contribute hugely to be able to go in, film people. It's funny because like just this last summer, I filmed like 40 plus training videos for like do you know what Poke is?
Yeah.
So like a Poke like shop.
Oh, nice.
So like all the training videos for them I like did. It was like more than 40 videos for them. And so it's exciting to be like, okay, like how can I transfer that skill to this? To go in, be like, all right, I'm going to film them dialing it in, explaining the process, educating them, and then creating a digital platform, like you said, to engage customers and to drive traffic both online as well as like to a brick and mortar like pop-up.
Well, and then this is where you can start to save costs. Is I wouldn't even say it necessarily has to be you filming it, because by going digital, you're no longer geographically constrained to the platform.
Yeah.
And so you no longer have to just use Minnesota coffee roasters so that you're promoting to try to get people to come into the event.
Yeah.
What you could do is, because of your knowledge of videography, you know what to look for in someone who's shooting it. So you can give them the specs of here's how it needs to be shot. Here's the frame to use. Here's the lens to use. Here's the feel we want. Here's the past videos. You do the editing so that they all feel the same and that there's a consistency to it. But then you're not limited to, hey, I'm just going to find all the best roasters in Minnesota, because very quickly you'll realize you've met everyone. What you can do is, who are the best roasters in the country, and can we pitch this to them, serve their coffee, and then on the other side is your website could end up becoming like an affiliate marketing platform for single origin espresso. And you found this niche within coffee that the real business could end up being affiliate marketing for single origin espresso. And you could become the authority of here. And here's why it's still important that you're doing the in-person thing, even if it's not in person. Now, here's where it gets interesting is, as long as you're pulling the shots and tasting them and you're reviewing them, or I would, again, recommend bringing someone on this team that is the expert.
Absolutely.
And they're tasting it. If you had the video of the expert at their place serving shots, shot by someone else, edited by you, so it's the same feel, and then you have your expert tasting it on your end, then you've got kind of a very unique video that you can pair together. And then, by the way, here's our favorite out of the 4 to buy as a single origin espresso. Boom, it's on the website. And so every month you've got X amount you're recommending. Maybe it's the past 3 months favorite.
Right.
It's like, here's this month's favorite, here's last month's. There's only 3 coffees. So that, like, if I'm a coffee nerd and there's guys only focusing on single origin espresso and they're working with some of the best professionals in the country, all of a sudden I'm like, I'll listen to these guys about espresso.
Right.
I'll buy this because they've done all the research that a coffee nerd would normally have to do to find a really good espresso. Because it's like, the amount of research Jeff will do before deciding which coffee, he rotates his subscriptions of different roasters, and the amount of research he'll do before deciding which one to go with is like a job on its own.
Yeah.
And so you could be providing the service for people, and as long as your recommendations are always on point and you've got experts involved with it, that would be really compelling.
Yeah.
And then the in-person thing could almost just be like, your experience.
Yeah.
And then the real business isn't, oh my God, how do we make this profitable? Because that is an extremely difficult thing to make profitable to the point where you can sustain a healthy life and pay your workers well.
For sure.
And so, especially if you need to find investors or anything like that, you go to them and the real business here is a digital educational platform, hyper focused on a growing category, on a growing category within a growing category.
Yeah.
Hyper focused on that. The funds we're using are going to be used to get the best people to film, to be in our content. And that probably would just be hiring people to film.
Right.
And then the business is much more compelling on a financial side for someone to see the upside versus like, oh, okay, I'll do this because they're passionate. And there are some investors that just go, I have extra money I can use to help them support their, here's the money to buy your thing. Now I own 50% of your company versus here's an opportunity for a digital platform, hyper focused on a single niche, which with the digital world, no niche is too fine. You can find anything on the internet these days. And so if someone that just is getting into single origin espresso is probably Googling single origin espresso. Someone who's super into it will learn about this platform because they're following all the people that are ending up on your site because you've found them to get on board with you. And so that would be the difficulty. And you'd have to have some sort of expert that is probably pretty connected within the network of these people because I think once they get what you're doing, it shouldn't be, I mean, it'll still be difficult because everybody's really busy, but if you came to me and you're like, hey, can we hire a professional, a camera person and audio person to come into your space? You pull 4 shots of espresso, say what they are. And then we can use that content. You can use that content. And then we'll also buy coffee from you to serve up here. And we're going to feature it on our platform. Would you be willing to do that? I'd be like, huh? Most messages I get are like, hey, I'd love to collab. I go, oh, cool. What do you have in mind? Send me free coffee and I'll post about it. I'm like, okay, well, and I usually do it because it's like, hey, here's a person who hasn't had our coffee. At the very least, here's one more person. Hopefully they taste it and go, I haven't had something like this. But you're bringing something to them, adding value to them, and it's a win-win.
And that's what we're looking for.
It doesn't feel scammy because if you came to me and you're like, what's the catch? You go, and you be very transparent about that. You go, the value added to us is we want to work with you. You're like, you're the type of person that you're an industry expert. We want to work with you. Also, it's valuable to us because it helps us promote our educational platform. But that is also beneficial to you because it increases your credentials as an educator within coffee. And that type of thing is really compelling. And I mean, even if I'm thinking of just like a Kickstarter, if I saw that Kickstarter, I'd know exactly who I want to share that with. Because like, there's only so many people that want to go learn about single origin espresso. But there's such a tight-knit community that it's very, very hard to build credibility. And that's what you lack. So you need to find somebody with the credibility. And even that person's probably not going to be the end-all, be-all. They're going to be the person that is a big enough command on espresso to be a voice of authority. But also that they might be able to connect you with the people to do it. And so that would be incredibly compelling. And then it would be exciting to still have the in-person experience because you'll find people that are like, I want to go taste espresso here. And if it is a mobile thing, then maybe like, hey, when the SCA comes up, you go serve there. and you're serving multiple different types of espresso. Hey, when different events pop up around the country, we can travel to these coffee-focused events to promote what we're doing more so than we need people to come in and buy this for $50 to be in here for an hour. Which still is a very cool experience, but I will tell you the challenges you'll face when you're tied to a geographic area, you're tied to a very, very focused type of person in that one area. And even I'm saying I might not come back for a second time if that's the price point. I try to distance from that. And
totally.
And so the research that would have to be done is like affiliate marketing. How does this work? What's a reasonable price to charge for affiliate marketing? How do we get the word out about that? Would be like, what are the financial upside? How much of a following would you have to have on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram for it to become financially viable as a real business? These are the types of things that would probably end up being things that you need to know.
Absolutely.
But those are actually fairly concrete. So if you go to an investor or you're building a business plan, you go, if we hit X amount of followers across these 3 platforms and we're driving X amount of traffic, here's what the business will be worth. And that's even not considering the fact that we're selling coffee through our platform.
Absolutely.
And I think this plays into our skills a lot better than providing some unique experience that Matthew and I, frankly, aren't qualified to provide.
Absolutely.
We're more qualified to provide the overhead and take on the risk of the business. But the experience itself, like, we want to leave that out to the people who devote their life and have this passion for coffee. Not to say that we don't, but
it should be said, there's a difference between passion and knowledge. And
absolutely.
I think too often people, and I wrote this down at the beginning, say we want to do what we love. A lot of people say that, and then they go do it, and then realize everyone around me knows more than I do. And I realized this quickly. It's why I don't roast our coffee. I became obsessed. I started roasting my own coffee and said, I'll need to do this for another 10 years before I'm comfortable doing both.
Absolutely.
But then, which felt like almost imposter syndrome at the beginning. But then I realized this allows me to focus entirely on where the business is going and making sure we're doing things correctly on that front, and to make sure that, like, are we looking at the right customers? Are we serving the right products and still get to enjoy what I love is drinking coffee? And so when I heard you say that, it's like, it's not a red flag, but it is a warning sign. That's like, doing what you love can't be like the end all be all, because I will tell you, if you're having to work every single weekend, you will quickly learn not to love it.
I totally get it.
And but the things I like is like I said at the beginning, you're going out, reaching out to people. You have a category that's growing. You've got a niche within that category that's growing. I think the part of your business where there's a link missing is how to find the people and how to make money off of that. And the pop-up is a very traditional way of finding people and making some money off of it. But the amount of work that will go into that is very high. And I'm saying you should still do that in some capacity. But I would struggle to say that that's the end business.
Absolutely.
And I hope that doesn't hurt your feelings.
Absolutely
totally not.
I hope I'm not like coming in and stomping on your idea here, because I would still show up to that every month. And I still think there's something there, and that's a great way to build connections, and that's something you could take on the road. If you could go to any country, if you find a way to either have a mobile unit that you can trailer, or you find a really effective way to do it in shops, that's something you can pop around and find those people, and that could be a physical way to market what you're doing, obviously probably in a post-COVID world.
For sure.
But this way you're kind of leaning into the digital side. You're not limited and tethered to the geographic area. You can provide value to the roasters that you're serving while also bringing something to an existing group of customers that will find value in it, and focusing on a niche of dialing in espresso that our baristas will really, really focus, especially if you're finding really credible people. And so that's the other part of having somebody that's like an extreme coffee nerd and expert on your team, is they'll be able to tell you, is this the type of person that we want to be paying for a full production thing? Is it going to be worth the time? Are they a true industry expert, or do they just have a big following? And those types of decisions, a lot of it's intuitive. It was like, like even just in my head, I can think of like 10 people that was like, if I saw them doing this, I would watch.
For
regardless of who's producing it. And then it's not even important what your background is. What it's important is that your logo and your name is tied to all of these things that's happening.
That's right. Yeah.
And then over time, you'll build a brand of like, anytime I see this, this takes a long time, but eventually it gets to the point that I don't know this person. I don't recognize this person talking right now, but it's a production of this, so they must be legit. I'm going to listen to what they're saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and even that provides value for the person presenting, talking about their coffee, the roaster. And like, this idea is cool, and it's awesome that you're approaching us with this on the podcast. And because like, even talking to our professors, like, these warning signs have been raised, like, how are you going to continue forward? How are you going to like grow this at all? How are you going to make something happen without breaking your back every weekend? And an idea that was raised was like, what about covering like a roaster's R&D cost? And they bring a new single origin espresso to you. We test it out, taste it, and we provide that value back for them using Matthew's videography skills, or even just like you were saying, hire a production company. So this gives us a lot to think about. So you didn't hijack this at all. We are entrepreneurs at heart. We're just here to learn. So, and you're in the industry. You're doing what we hope to be doing with espresso. So this has been like just a great opportunity to sit here and learn and take it all in. And appreciate your time so much.
Yeah, of course. And it makes the pitch easier too. And that's what I like about honing any idea is like, can I, because the pitch at the beginning, I'm like, it took me like 5 minutes to kind of figure out that it's like, okay, so it's like a pop-up concept that's this. Whereas this, you go, we're creating an educational platform hyper-focused on the niche of single origin specialty coffee that's going to have digital and physical components to it to be able to drive the expertise and the brand of what we're doing. And there are roasters out there that don't, even really established roasters don't have the time, resources, energy to be able to hyper focus like this. And so the value you could add to them would be awesome. And then if you can build a brand behind this, eventually it's going to be like, people are going to be asking you, can I be next? And then you should have like a very upfront set of standards is here's how we decide who we work with. Cause that will also be something that you need an expert, because if you say yes to everyone and you're talking about espresso and a roaster that is just not that good, and you're not even aware that it's not that great, credibility is gone like that.
Absolutely.
And so the upfront spend of like getting good people, hopefully the spend's not too high and just the way it was laid out, and there's lots of different ways to take it and how do we get people to engage with this. But that's kind of the big thing is you as a videographer, you as an entrepreneur, when you're approaching these people, that's your value add. I say that's the only value like I have within Folly is that I'm like in between that. I'm obsessed with coffee, but I also love the business side. I'm fascinated by it.
For sure.
And so like that's my in between there. Whereas you've got two people, you can totally focus on different aspects of the business. And that way you can go and tell them like, hey, I pick out who does the shooting. I do the editing. Here's my previous work. Cause I get people that are like, hey, we'll film a free video for you. And I say no, cause I just feel bad.
Oh, for sure.
Cause I go, you're expecting me to hire you later. But if you went to them and go, we want to film the content to use on our educational platform. They go, okay, I don't feel bad that this person's working for free. And they go, and it's a win-win. It's a transaction. It's not just like, what's your real end goal here?
Absolutely.
What are you hiding?
So I feel like I talked my absolute head off here, but I think that's a good sign because if I talk a lot. And so but when I get excited about something, I think you're on the right path of the focus of the why is right. And then the how is the big question.
For sure.
And that's what we're trying to figure it out. So like this conversation has cleared so much in my head, and I'm sure Matthew's feeling the same. Our thoughts are just racing, and we're going to get in the car and just try to hash this out.
You're probably feeling a fair amount of anxiety right now. Anxiety is a good thing. I keep repeating myself on this because anytime I have a conversation with someone that gets my wheels turning, I feel intense anxiety because it's like, wait, why haven't I been doing this? Like, is there someone else out there that's got a better idea than this guy? Like, should I? Oh my gosh, do I start doing this? Do I go find more people to work on this idea with? But that's what you want to have versus like an idea that every time you tell someone, they kind of have a few, like not even a few, but like a list of reasons. Like, here's why I wouldn't do it. What you want is you tell people about their idea and then they go, oh, okay. That's interesting.
And that's what we're looking for.
Cool.
Any thoughts, Matthew?
No, I'm super excited. I thank you so much for all the advice. Like for us, like we just want to be as teachable as possible too. Like we want to be flexible, and we don't want to be married to an idea that's like, this is what we have to do. And I'm not going to listen to anyone else. Like, I think you have to, as an entrepreneur, you have to be flexible. I think there's a certain level of like stubbornness you need to have that I'm going to make this idea work. But I think you also need to be able to be like, okay, this needs to pivot. It's just not going to work.
Yeah.
And I think for you to say like, managing your time is the most important resource to do and the thing to do. I think that's like hugely great advice. And yeah, I'm just super thankful and appreciative of like you being so open to just share ideas with us and ideate with us. And yeah, I think it's been great.
Yeah.
And like the people in the industry that we've talked to have been like, oh, have you talked to Folly yet? Have you talked to Rob or Jeff? And like, what you're doing is right down his alley. We know the coffee, but Rob knows the business side of things too.
Well, they're probably full of crap, but
I'd have to argue with that.
It's funny because the term entrepreneur generally makes me shudder a lot until Johan over at Wesley Andrews put it in a way that like made me very comfortable with the idea. Because going into this, I get really excited about business, but like I would never bring that up because I'm like, I still want people to know that I'm like a huge coffee nerd, but. He said it in a way that and I'm very roughly translating it because this is years ago, and he said the entrepreneur's job is to bring the artisan's product and story to the people. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what you would be doing.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the responsibility of having to become experts is taken off your shoulders. Yep. The responsibility of having to be experts on tasting and dialing espresso is taken off your shoulders.
That's right.
The responsibility of being tied to these time-intensive things is taken off your shoulders.
Yeah.
And then you're bringing people's story and their products and recommendations to them. And like the value add there is you're doing intense research just to make sure that what you're serving and talking about is a really, really good single origin espresso, which is dope.
Yeah. And that's our goal. Like we aren't in this to make millions of dollars. We don't even think we're going to make money, at least for a while. But what we want to do is we want to provide our customers with value, and we want to make enough money to keep it going in order to provide them with more value and to educate them and to just help bring light to what we're figuring out through talking to different entrepreneurs and different experts in the industry. So this is right up our alley, and that's what we're trying to do. And like Matt said, we just want to be as teachable as possible, and we want to figure out how can we do this in the most efficient manner.
Because that's the other side about affiliate marketing that is awesome is all you'd be doing is you're a resource to drive traffic to someone's product. And then you're not even in charge of order fulfillment. You're not in charge of the roasting. You're not in charge of quality control. If it's like, obviously quality is like, you'd only be working with roasters that have all that in place. But all of that being out of the realm of what you're doing is extremely beneficial because when you talk about not making money, when I started Folly, I had to quit my full-time job. I had to start working 4 gigs and building this out on the side. And then there was a certain point where even if I financially wasn't ready to do it, I had to quit because the time was too much. And again, I'm pursuing the passion where I'm speaking from experience here. That's just doing what you love is not always the best thing for a good life for like 4 or 5 years.
Absolutely.
But what you're doing there is you could legitimately have a full-time job, especially with 2 of you, and make sure that like, as long as you have a really good rhythm of making sure that like you're creating great content and you've got, that's the other side is like the rhythm of how often is it coming out. Customers are, and consumers of content are very intuitive to that. That if you do it on a consistent schedule, like people will start to follow regardless. Like this podcast is so surprising to me that anyone listens to this, but it's like the biggest thing is that I just keep doing it and I post it every Sunday.
For sure.
And that's kind of a big lesson I've learned from this. But awesome to have you both in. I'm excited to see where this goes. I think you've got a great category, a niche within a category of very passionate consumers, people who are consuming any sort of educational component they can.
For sure.
And you could do it in a way that's like multifaceted with the physical serving of it, with the digital side. But the digital side, you can really start to imagine the growth possibilities of pitching this as a business because the monetization value of these platforms is like highly visible. So you can do research of like, if we get a following of X, Y, and Z on these platforms with an engagement level of this, here's our profitability. Which I'm not doing at all. And it's kind of the thing that I was like, in the back of my mind, I was like, that's not so much I love creating content. I love doing it. It's fun. but it's not my passion.
For sure.
If it was, like, if I was obsessed with that more than coffee, this is probably what I would be doing, is like some sort of educational platform because of that. But I'm like, I'm doing what I love, and it's like, it's a grind, which is a stupid pun, but
love it.
But what the advantage you have is that you're at this point. I ironically just released an episode about launching new products. That the advantage you have is that you're not tied to one type of product.
Right.
Yeah. It's single origin specialty coffee. And I was like, okay, it is in a great category, which made me decide to quit my job and do it. But outside of that, I was like, this is what we're doing regardless, because it's what I want to do.
Right.
You have the flexibility right now to, like, all these thoughts you're having about the backbreaking work.
Yep.
You're not tied to it yet.
Yeah.
And even if you started doing that, you're still not tied to it.
Yeah.
Which would be, I think, exciting.
Yeah.
Sure.
It'd be super exciting. Well, yeah, we really appreciate your time, Rob,
Thank
and
you so much.
like all of your help and just bringing clarity to a really messy idea.
No, for sure.
No, I love it. It's awesome. I think there's a lot of different ways to go with it, which is really stressful, but it's exciting.
Yeah,
So
totally.
exciting.
Awesome. Thanks for coming in. I'm going to end it like I do every episode and say, have a nice day.